Hey everyone, super excited to be here today with Gabriel Cardona. There you go. Gabriel and I go way back. We worked together at Bitcoin.com, and now you've got an amazing role at Avalanche and really getting some deep insight. Maybe instead of me saying what you're doing now, maybe you just want to give a quick introduction to the audience about yourself and sort of what you're doing today at Avalanche.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can hear me okay? Everything good?
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me. It's awesome to reconnect with Stefan. As he mentioned, we go way back. We were both at Bitcoin.com a few years ago. And while I was there, I was actually doing developer services. So I had a startup that did Bitcoin Cash, technical SDKs and cloud services, and it was acquired by Bitcoin.com. So I was there doing the director of developer services. And then I found out about Avalanche in 2018, and I stepped away from I stepped away from Bitcoin.com at the end of 2019. And right after I stepped away, Goon and Kevin, who are the two co-founders at Ava Labs, reached out to Chris Troutner. You remember Trout?
Yep.
And they were like, "Hey, we love developer.bitcoin.com. Do you want to do something like that for the Avalanche ecosystem?" And fortunately for me, Chris was like, I don't want to leave Bitcoin Cash yet, but you should reach out to Gabriel anyway. He's the guy who built all of this stuff. So I got connected with Goon and Kevin, and they were looking for somebody to do developer services at Ava Labs. And so I joined. Actually, this month is my 2-year. I think in 2 days is my 2-year anniversary. Yeah, so I joined before we went to the main net, before we raised capital. It was a good time to join. I think that I believe I was employee number 23. I might have been 24, 25, but we're just now about to cross 200. So, we're growing rapidly. And I do developer services. So I help, I maintain Avalanche JS. So that's the most technical part of my job, is that I do some engineering on the day-to-day. I maintain our TypeScript and JavaScript library.
Yep.
And then I also travel around the world and do conferences and meetups and hackathons. Like this last week, we were just in Berlin. We had an Avalanche house there for the Formula E race, and I was in Barcelona before that and Lisbon before that. So helping to inspire developers and get them super jazzed about Avalanche and hoping to build on our platform. And then I also do partner integration. My team does partner integrations. So as you might imagine, there's just tons and tons of teams and companies and startups that are on ramping into Avalanche. They have a lot of FAQ, and they need somebody to hold their hand and help them into the ecosystem. So we do a lot of that on the day-to-day as well.
And what do you see as, sort of, it's amazing. So one hand, you're spending a lot of time in Europe, right? Lisbon, Barcelona, Berlin. And so why Europe? And then, let's just start there. Why do you see so many developers coming out of Europe?
I think in our particular case, we recently signed a deal with Andretti Formula E Racing. So we have like a marketing partnership there. And so we are having events that are in concert with the different Formula E, the E-Prix as they call it, that's happening around the world. So that's one of the reasons we've been going to Europe, is simply our business partnerships have been drawing us there. And so that's why I was there this last week. We made an announcement that going forward, Porsche is actually going to provide the powertrain and other support services for the Avalanche Andretti. Avalanche Andretti Formula E car. Go ahead.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Yes, so good set of partners there, and a lot of partners. We got a lag here, right?
That's all good. Go for it.
Yeah. No, a lot of partners there, and it seems really interesting. Formula E has really come a long way, and it's also electricity, right? Electric cars. So it's really interesting. And the interesting thing about Formula E, and electric cars, what a lot of people don't understand, is a lot of it's software based, right? It's the software that steers the car, controls the car. It's not a combustion engine. It's the software that decides when to connect to the batteries and how to accelerate and stuff like that. So it's
that was the connect between us and them. Avalanche is the most. We market ourselves as perhaps the greenest blockchain platform out there, because Avalanche consensus is a really big paradigm shift. So there's we live and breathe this stuff every day, and we know that there is 1,000 new projects every single day. There is an absolute word salad of different techno babble that gets thrown at you. So it's very easy for people to. I understand when people are still not up to speed on Avalanche, despite us having been on our mainnet for almost 2 years. There's just a lot going on, and I understand. Avalanche really is a genuine paradigm shift. There have been two fields of consensus in computer science prior to Avalanche consensus. There's so-called classical consensus, and it goes back to the 70s and the 80s. And then there was Nakamoto consensus, and it's one of the reasons that Bitcoin blew up in the very beginning with actual academics and computer science and professionals. These people appreciated that, no, there is actually something very special happening here. This person, Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he or they or she were, they solved a really big problem in computer science that hasn't had any breakthroughs in 30 years. And so we see Avalanche consensus as being the third major breakthrough in the field of consensus. And it's really a big leap forward because we have this sub-second finality. So if anybody's ever worked in a blockchain space, even Ethereum, where the blocks are relatively fast at 15 or 20 seconds a piece, it still feels glacier when you compare it to the UI that we're used to with Web 2, which is nearly instantly. And so Avalanche consensus has this sub-second mutable reversible finality. As soon as you scan a QR code, your transaction is done and you're on your way. And then we get thousands of transactions per second on top of that, and we have subnets. There's all this exciting stuff happening. So the sort of the Venn diagram of what is Andretti doing with Avalanche is, some of it's from a marketing perspective, and that's simply that we are the greenest ecosystem out there, and we're incredibly fast. They're the green, EPRI is the greenest racing out there, and of course Andretti is the best, right? And then some of it, like you said, is also on the technical side of things. As you mentioned, these cars are basically supercomputers on wheels. When you see them, it's absolutely amazing, and they don't burn any gas at all. So there's a lot of potential overlap between Andretti and Ava Labs, and then also just on the sustainability front. I'm a huge believer that necessity is the mother of invention, and that we will in fact create technology which is brings nature into balance within our lifetime. Because if we don't, we're basically screwed. So it's sort of like we either solve this problem or we don't, and we fell in a big way. And so I'm just a big believer that strictly out of necessity, humans will figure out a way to create technology which is in balance. And we're seeing that with these Formula E cars. We're seeing that with the Avalanche consensus, where it's incredibly green. I don't know if you saw, I should have had this brought up, but I didn't know we were going to talk about this. Recently, there was a study that was released that shows how much energy Bitcoin burns and Ethereum burns and Avalanche burns. And Bitcoin obviously is way more than even Ethereum, and Ethereum is way more than Avalanche, but they burn thousands and thousands and thousands % more energy. Avalanche consensus is what's called quiescent. So basically it just chills out if there's no consensus messages being passed around. And so the cool thing about Avalanche is that it can be generalized to work with non-binary problems. So not only confirmed or unconfirmed, you can have, let's say, 5 different states. And the way our subnets work, our subnets and our virtual machines are incredibly general and generic. So, in the case of, let's say, Ethereum, where they have smart contracts, the contract data structure that you see in a line of in a body of code, it does one thing and it does it really well, but it's not super generic in general. With Avalanche consensus in our subnets, you can spin up subnets that do all kinds of stuff, not just financial transactions. And so I predict and I believe that Avalanche is going to end up using in all kinds of different systems, not in these crypto systems. So I think there's just a huge opportunity for sustainability and sort of this green movement, and I'm happy to be working on a project which is part of that movement. And then we're seeing fruits with Andretti and now Porsche also in the party.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously that's really topical, right? If you think about what happened this week or last week, actually it was, where the S&P ESG Index excluded Tesla from the index instead of having, and then having 6 oil companies in there because they were more ESG friendly. So it was actually interesting seeing that happen whilst, we
are
not
aware of that. I don't know the details there. So it had some slick marketing on their end, or what exactly do you think's happening there?
No, I'm they've excluded Tesla from it. I feel they didn't feel Tesla was ESG compliant, right? Even though they're fully electric, they brought electric cars to the world, and there are a bunch of other elements in there, right? In ESG, it's not just environment, right? It's also social and governance, and maybe there were other factors on the social and the governance side that they are trying to enforce onto merit-run businesses, right? So it's like, but anyway, so that was an interesting sort of sidestep. But one of the things I'm going to come back to the idea around, the fast finality that you were talking about, right? We were Bitcoin Cash. We're working on this pre-consensus model that would allow us to also have extremely fast execution, right? But I think Avalanche has taken this to the next level. And I remember it was actually you who showed this to me, the whole Snowball white paper, right? I mean, that was like, I think it was 2018 or something like that, where we were talking about that and that consensus model. So I suppose that's now the foundation for the consensus model at Avalanche, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're precisely right. So yeah,
Yeah,
in 2018, he and I were already working on attempts to solve this problem. And
yeah,
so I was in Milan in 2018 in Milan, Italy. We had a Satoshi's Vision conference. It was put
yeah,
on by not Bitmain, Bitcoin Unlimited,
yeah,
with those amazing folks. And so while we were there, Kevin and Goon, again, the co-founders of Ava Labs. Goon was famously a professor at Cornell for 20 years, and Kevin was one of his students. They woke up, I believe, at 4 a.m. Ithaca, New York time, and gave us a presentation on using Avalanche consensus with Nakamoto consensus for both pre and post consensus. So there's a lot going on there. It's like a consensus Oreo. So on one side you have Avalanche consensus for pre-consensus.
yeah,
Then you go through the traditional Nakamoto consensus every 10 minutes, a block voted on by proof of work. And then you round it out with the other side of the sandwich, which is Avalanche for post-consensus. And so Amaury Sachet, who is one of the co-creators of Bitcoin Cash, and now
yeah.
he's the main guy behind eCash and
eCash.
Bitcoin ABC
Yeah,
is his team. He gave a presentation called, I think it was called Embrace the DAG or something like that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so at that very meeting in Milan in 2018 is when the light went on for me for Avalanche, because I immediately understood the problem it was solving. And that's this, immutable, irreversible sub-second finality with thousands of transactions per second. Basically what I have been calling this coming of age moment for the blockchain. And so I pitched this a lot in my tribe. Let me pitch it to your tribe real quick. So the way I have been seeing this is like so. When the web first came out in the mid 90s, similar to the blockchain, there were a lot of computer scientists and academics and professionals. They and professors, these people understood that, hey, the web has the potential to change everything.
yeah,
And then they started playing around with the technology and they realized, maybe this technology is not as mature as a desktop application. When I use this web app in circa 1996, it's just not quite as good as a native Windows app. I don't think the technology is ready. And so the dot-com bubble happened around 99, 2000. A lot of people made a lot of money. Then the bubble popped and a lot of money rushed out. And that was the dot-com era. But people who saw the original vision continued to stay true to the game and continued, busting their butt every day. And around 2004, 2005, we saw the emergence of what has since been called Web 2.0. So
yeah,
there was an emergence of several different things, primarily what's known as AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML, but there was also the emergence of modern web standards like CSS and HTML and ECMAScript. All of these things started coming into focus, and the web experienced this coming of age moment where then it did in fact fulfill its potential, and it became radically transformative and changed everybody's lives around us, to the fact that we're now having this meeting over the web, right?
yeah,
And so similar, when the blockchain emerged in 2008, 2009, people were like, okay, here we go again. This has the potential to change everything. But for 10 years, there's been this roadblock or this barrier to entry or whatever, and it just hasn't matured yet. To me, Avalanche consensus really represents this coming of age moment where now we do in fact have this thousands of transactions per second for each blockchain, and you can launch your own application on its own blockchain. So imagine every single dApp gets thousands of transactions per second, this immutable sub-second finality, these super inexpensive fees. And so now we're going to witness the blockchain have a coming of age moment, and it's going to be as radically transformative and fulfill its potential. And so I had been waiting for that to happen. Yeah, cut me off at any moment. Go. You have a thought. Go for it.
yeah. No, no, no. I just, it just brings home a lot of memories, right? Because in the end, the reason why I got into Bitcoin back in 2000 and whenever it was, the gas, it was just Bitcoin at the time. Gas fees was super low and finality was really quick because it wasn't congested. So, the confirmations were really quick. And that was like a Zoom. I mean, in those days, I was using Skype, right? We were doing Skype calls and the transfers happened instantaneously. And we were trying to do that at Bitcoin Cash because I think what we've realized in this last crash, one thing that has happened is, we have to build a currency that has more than just financial, price go up, and it has to have utility, right? Number one, utility to use the compute power and resources that the network is providing, e.g., the Avalanche community, all the node operators, the validators, etc., and as well be able to use it in real life, so I can pay for goods with it, right? And I think we lost that touch. I mean, obviously the DeFi elements, and there are lots of financial instruments and products out there that we're putting on chain, which is brilliant, right? But I think we also struggle there with regulatory hurdles, right? And especially in Europe, I mean, what the regulators there are trying to do is just really, it's amazing to me how they just want to push the innovation to Asia and to the US, right? So it's great for us here, right? But
it's just going to backfire in their face. They're just it's going to backfire. They're going to show up at the party anyway, but they're just going to be late, and they're going to miss the first mover advantage. And as you mentioned, Asia is going to leapfrog over them, and so,
but also look, the top companies, they're no longer in Europe. They're not coming out of Europe. The engineering talent and they have great talent, right? They've got great universities. They've got great, research labs. But the monetization of that, happens elsewhere. And so I think that's great for the rest of the world. And how do we But that's
So I was going to finish off my sort of storyline there. So basically, the story being that we saw Omri Sachet give a presentation called "Don't Fear the Dagger, Embrace the Dagger" something, and he was at the time pitching, "Hey, Bitcoin Cash has this thing called ZeroConf." So if anybody remembers, back in the very, very original time, like Stefan was mentioning, back in the old OG Bitcoin days, there was this idea of ZeroConf, where basically you could send a transaction, and as long as the risk exposure is per each person. So there's no hard number I can give you here and say anything less than $10,000 is safe. That it doesn't work that way. It's more about your risk exposure. But for most people, a certain amount of transactions, which again, it's hard to give a direct number, but like 10,000 or less or so, you could be confident that you could accept that with zero confirmation simply because the topography of the network. By the time it got pushed out to all these different nodes, it would be way too challenging to issue it on another node and basically have the second transmission beat the first transmission. Somewhere along the way, for whatever reasons, I'm not judging negative or positive, the BTC core developers removed that and replaced it with something called replace by fee, which is whenever the blocks get super high, you can issue your transaction again and pay a little bit more money and bump it to the top of that auction, because it's an auction market. You're auctioning off for a resource that's limited. And so ZeroConf got replaced by
for the miners.
Exactly. And that's part of a lot of the vitriol between the BTC and the BCH tribe, which I no longer care about myself. But basically, Omri was pitching at the time, even in Milan, to what if we had a Bitcoin system, Bitcoin Cash, that leveraged Nakamoto consensus? And so when you say is this Avalanche consensus at the heart of Avalanche the network? It is. Now, obviously, Avalanche the network that I'm working on today is not the same as the eCash system, which Omri launched. That is a derivative of Bitcoin via Bitcoin Cash. So Bitcoin Cash forked into Bitcoin, forked into eCash. Avalanche is a network that we launched from scratch in August 2020. So we're right below 2 years, and we've had some absolutely insane milestones. When I was in Berlin, we had just crossed, I'd say today we're probably like 175 million transactions on our C chain. And so we've had several different initiatives which have really helped take us to the next level. In the very beginning, we had this grant program, Avalanche X for grants. And so a lot of the original dApps that launched on our network, we funded through the form of grants. And then whenever we've also had Avalanche Blizzard, which is like a $200 or $250 million investment fund for ecosystem. We also have Multiverse, which is basically an initiative for to pay not to incentivize developers to launch their own subnets. We also have the Culture Catalyst Fund, which we announced in Barcelona a couple months back, and Grimes is the first person that's going live on that. She's creating an NFT metaverse book. There's one more, but it's slipping my mind at the second. I'll think of it. But we had another one for blue chip dApps that we announced in Barcelona that was basically an incentivization program to incentivize blue chip dApps to come over from other ecosystems. So it ended up working out really well for the Avalanche Foundation because all of the funds that we set aside in the very beginning were allocated in AVAX, and then the price of AVAX went very much higher, and so we ended up having a lot more capital than we thought we were going to. And so the Avalanche ecosystem is absolutely blowing up. We just now are reaching the point where we have subnets are coming into focus. So recently the DeFi Kingdom launched their own subnet, and then Krabata, which is a game, launched their own subnet recently. And the reason that's really powerful is because, as I mentioned before, we see this world of application-specific blockchains. So one of the cool things you can do in Avalanche is you can launch your own instance of the EVM and launch your dApp specifically on it. And then you get all of that network throughput and finality, and you don't have to share it with any other developers. And so we envision this world we're calling the Internet of Finance, where we have these thousands and thousands of these subnets, and they can all do cross subnet swaps. So when you spin up a subnet, you immediately get access to the billions of dollars of TVL locked on our C chain. You immediately get access to the thousands or hundreds of thousands or whatever it is of users that exist on our C chain. And all you have to do is have them hop over, and it's the same user experience as any other bridging. So if you're used today to bridging between Avalanche and Binance or whatever, it's the same user experience. And so when you launch your own subnet, you get these thousands and thousands of transactions, and you can customize the blockchain to however you want it. You can have an EVM, you can have a DAG, you can have a linear blockchain, you can do so much. The Avalanche network is incredibly expressive, and it's been an incredibly, incredibly exciting journey. And I'm really glad I got to join when I did, because I've just seen so much happen in 2 years. It's been outrageous.
Would you say that subnet model and the C chain is sort of similar to the sort of Polkadot and their parachains and what they've launched, or what what is it? Cosmos call their zones, right? So they have the core Cosmos hub, and then everything sort of builds off around it.
Yeah, it's very similar. In fact, when people ask me who are your all's biggest competitors, I always bring up Cosmos and Polkadot, because they're much more so than Ethereum 2.0 or something like that. The difference being is the security. So when you launch on Polkadot, I'm no Polkadot expert, so if somebody's out there watching this, forgive me, but I believe there's only like 200 slots on the Polka chain or whatever it is, and you have to auction for it. It's not like that in Avalanche, of course. There's as many subnets as you want. You, however, have to incentivize these subnet validators to come and validate your chain. So some people think that's a pro, some people think that's a con, but it's different than Polkadot and Cosmos in that regard. It's up to you to incentivize. However, that gives you a bunch of expressibility. So whenever you fire up your own asset, you fire up your own subnet, you can use your own token to pay the fees. You can have the fees be whatever model you want. You can burn them like we do, or you can give them back to the miners. There's all kinds of different ways that you can play it. And so we decided that it would be, we thought it was a better play to give developers the option to do what they want. And so one of the things that I've always thought is weird about Polkadot, and this isn't a shot at their system, I'm sure it's amazing, and there's some really smart guys and gals building it, but it always seemed weird to me that there was only 200 slots on the parachain, and that you have to auction them off every year. And I always thought, what if you launch the next Facebook, and then somehow you screw up and you don't win the auction? You lose your dApp basically. Presumably workarounds, but I don't know what they are. But yeah, I would say when people ask me who are our closest competitors, I say Polkadot and Cosmos. But I think really we're doing something even big and beyond what they're doing. We're building the Internet of Finance. And so I keep telling people that, akin to the people who built the DARPANET in the late 60s and the people who built the TCP/IP stack in the early 70s, it's been 50 years since they built TCP/IP. And I would argue that their work is having a greater impact every single day, because every single day the web becomes even more and more ubiquitous and more transformative. And so I'm confident that the work we are doing now is going to resonate and have impact for generations. I don't think it'll take 50 years for our work to have impact, because the pace of change is accelerating. In the next 10 years, we're going to experience more technological innovation than we did in the previous 100 years. So it's not going to take 50 years.
So I was at a meeting on Sunday, and we had a brainstorming session with some really big whales, and one of the things that we were trying to identify, how big is the overall blockchain community and how big is the participants in the various crypto projects, right? And we sort of came to numbers that maybe 500 million people around the world have got crypto in some form or fashion, right? Even if it's just a Satoshi or a couple of sats on their Robinhood account or whatever it might be, right? And
I think that's a
fair
guess. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you break that down into DeFi, right? And so, okay, of those, how many are really the sort of non-custodial financial participants in all of this, not just on exchange doing the trading, but actually really in the DeFi world? And we came to a number that is around anywhere between 10 to 20 million.
Wow, you think is this so? That seems small to me. So you think we're dealing with 10 to 20 million are the people who are doing DeFi? Yeah, the way I have been saying it is everybody's sort of familiar with the bell curve of adoption, right? And on the bell curve of adoption, it's a typical bell curve. And over on this side, you have the very, very smallest sliver. That's the innovators. That's the Satoshis of the world. Then going a little bit bigger, you have the early adopters. That's sort of what we've been doing for the last 10 years. And then you get into that first big hump of the center of the bell curve, and that's mainstream. And then the other side of the hump is sort of like the laggards. And then as you tail off, it's kind of like the people who are never going to update no matter what you do. Yeah. And so I kind of feel like we are definitely we're moving into the mainstream phase. It's obvious the blockchain is going mainstream right now. So that's the opportunity. All of the developer, all of the tooling, all of the user experience stuff, all of the custodial services, all of the enterprise handholding, all of the stuff that it's going to take to on-ramp. You said you think 500 million people, so that's 1/14th of the planet or so. Yeah. That seems reasonable in my opinion. So now we need the people to come in and, pardon the horrible cliche, but give us the iPhone of crypto, give us the Macintosh of crypto, give us the thing that can take us from command line utilities to GUIs. Yeah, that's what we're waiting for.
Yeah, so it's really user experience, right? But I also do think that the finality element is really going to enhance the Satoshi vision, really. I mean, of a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, right? What does that look like? And if I can do a remittance from my MetaMask to my, Phantom wallet, bang, bang, right? And it happens instantaneously, and it closes out, then that is such a satisfying experience that I think once people start witnessing that all of a sudden that exchange of value really provides a unique user experience, right? And so,
why do you think it is? Why do you think it is that remittance has not become the killer app of crypto? So for people who don't know, let me butcher what a remittance is. A remittance is when you grow up in a poorer nation and you go work in a wealthier nation and you send your money back to your family. That's how I think about remittance payments. I'm sure there's some subtlety there, but that's sort of like the super high level. In my mind, remittance has been the killer app of crypto since forever and a day ago. Why has it not taken off as the killer app of crypto?
I think it's still, my view is ultimately that finality, right? When it happens instantaneously, and people are really scared, right? If I have to pay 5 Bitcoin and I've got to wire that and I send it to the wrong address, oh my God, it's I'm not ready to do that. Right. And that's why the second user experience that I think has been created and we haven't maximized that really well is actually the stablecoin. Because the stable coin is a flat coin, it doesn't provide volatility, and people feel super comfortable that I'm not going to be the guy that spent 11 million on a pizza, right? I don't want to be that guy, right? And be laughed at the end. I mean, psychologically, it's just purely psychologically. That's the only reason, and that's why it's a great user experience. Because if I have to go and take my Bitcoin, I have to convert it into a USDT or a C, whatever I'm converting into. And then once I've converted it, then I can, but I still had that exchange rate at that time to convert my BTC. So it would be the same. But marketing wise, it just psychologically, it would have such a big impact. And it has, right? And so how do we now combine those two into an amazing experience?
Yeah. So I want to talk about what you've been building really quickly. So when I was at Bitcoin.com, I won't put the person's name on docs because I respect their privacy, but one of the engineers on my team used to convert 80% or 85% of his paycheck, because we used to get paid in Bitcoin Cash, at least I did, and we paid Bitcoin Cash. And so he would immediately turn 25% of his Bitcoin Cash into a Tether, I think at the time. It might have been USDC, I don't remember. But he was like, "Hey, man, I'm not able to play the volatility game. I have family, I have kids, so I have to be sure that the salary I'm getting is the salary I'm getting." And so he would do that immediately. So I remember even then kind of being like, "That's a damn good use of a stable coin." And stable coins, like, what has prevented crypto from going mainstream? We've all thought about it so many times, and one of them is volatility. There's no question about it. Merchants just cannot live in a world where, at the end of the day, their capital can go up or down by 50%. They would love for it to go up, but they can't live in the world where it goes down. A lot of these merchants are on razor thin margins as it ends. So if you're talking about 20% difference, they're out of business. And so I think that's a good way to circle back to what you guys have been researching and building. Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, we a couple of things, right? I mean, we felt that prices, not only is the crypto market volatile, the fiat market's really volatile. And not only is the fiat stock market volatile, you also have this stable coin, the US dollar or the renminbi or the UK pound or the euro, that is allegedly super stable. And when they print trillions of dollars, we just felt that that was not a way that you can keep a currency stable. And the impact always comes later, and especially if you don't have a monopoly environment anymore, right? And they are, and they've lost the monopoly, right? With crypto coming in, all of a sudden there are different currencies there, and it's not governed by a centralized jurisdiction anymore, particularly not the cryptocurrencies. And so either way, there is inflation. We now have inflation, and we spotted that 2 years ago. And so we built Truflation, and we basically are now aggregating hundreds of millions of data points into one on a daily basis in real time, from various online sources, not manually, not anything. And it's super transparent. We provide it open source on a GitHub repo. And we're now trying to figure out what are the products that we could build out of this. And one of those products is ultimately a coin that's going to be pegged or tied to the inflation of a given nation.
Got it. So walk that out for me a little bit, because I know what stable coins do. They prevent me. They protect me from the volatility of the crypto markets. But it sounds like you're talking about a subsequent protection that is a volatility against inflation. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, exactly. So basically the price will go up based on inflation. So if inflation's 13, the value of your coin is not $1 anymore, it's $1.13.
It's amazing.
And
amazing.
Yeah, so wow. that's and it's got to be collateralized. I think one thing that we learned is the fact that you can't just have a purely algorithmic stablecoin with no collateral behind it. And I think the team at Terra, they realized that, and so they were trying to build it. I think there were maybe 2 months, behind. In 2 months' time, they would have had a 50 to 60 to 80% collateralization, which would have made it a lot more stable. But as it turned out, they didn't. So a lot of people, unfortunately, lost their money, but so did a lot of institutions and a lot of those accredited investors as well, right? So, but either way, I think you need collateral backed, right? And if you look at examples like Volt and Frax, what they've done is they've shown that with an 80% collateralization, you can have an algorithmic element to that, just covering maybe 20% of the exposure and trying to hold the peg.
Yeah, that's so incredibly exciting. I can't wait to see that come to fruition. So what is what does the roadmap and timeline look like?
Yeah, so we were excited, and I was in just at West Palm Beach at Permissionless, and which was more permissioned than it was permissionless. But everybody there was talking about permission and insights and AML and KYC, and there was very little about how do we provide an amazing user experience? How do we, and what we're talking about now, and I think the developers, we need to let the developers rip, because they're going to create that user experience. Somebody in the back door of a room behind 5 screens or 2 screens is going to come up with the great user experience, right? And that's what we want. And how do we not squash them and make it so difficult for them with regulation on top of regulation on top of regulation that they need to have at least $5 million in legal fees before they can even launch their product, which is going to be such a prohibitor for them to get going. But neither here nor there, we just launched Truflation on Avalanche, right? And so that was for us. And we were at the Avalanche event at Permissionless, so it was really good to sort of see that. And just seeing the ecosystem on top of Avalanche was super impressive, right? And so we met with some of the great DeFi companies out there. And ultimately, what we're now trying to do is how do we get into more and more wallets? How do we get into proofs, point of sale devices, so that ultimately we can sort of enable a real utility for a coin that people will appreciate.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So was Truflation already live on other EVM networks?
Yeah, it was. We were on other EVMs and it was really quick. I think within 3 days, we got it across from Ethereum onto Avalanche, or one developer alone. He got it all across and ported and built an adapter that now runs on the Chainlink service on Avalanche. Right. So
amazing. So are you guys issuing on Avalanche or bridging over from Ethereum, or both?
No, we're doing both. We're doing both.
That's exciting, man. I didn't realize you guys were actually live and issuing on Avalanche. That's huge. Is there any press I can share?
Yeah, no, we just, I think, we have some Twitter feeds. I'll share those with you. I'll put them in the link below so people can see. And so once we get that, then we also shared it in the Avalanche community. The team's been really helpful under John and stuff. So Matthew has been really a really good champion for us. And been introducing us to everybody. So it was really good and helpful. We didn't take you up on the grants, though. Damn it. Next time.
Next time. I'm sure there's another opportunity.
But I think what we're looking for is just more use cases, right? How do we build a community around this and use cases? Because in crypto land, I feel the belief in the existing inflation number that is being presented to us from the existing institutions is not an accurate reflection of what's happening on the ground. When you go to the gas pump, you feel it's more than 8.5%, right? And you go back a year ago, it's way more, right? You feel the same when you go into the supermarket, when your shopping cart is less and less and less, right? I mean, we've been talking about that in crypto for I don't know how many years, right? Whereas one Bitcoin gets you more and more and more, right? So it's the total opposite of that. And so how do we address that, and how do we make and hold, number one, the institutions today just give an alternative so there is something else that people can opt in for, and how do we identify the use cases that developers want to build using this data, right? What is that use case? What are those markets? And we're seeing in finance, as you're talking finance, one of the biggest areas is the whole financial industry. I want to make sure that my dollar that I have in my bank account doesn't lose in real term in value. How do I hold and retain the value of that? And there are these products called TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. So you buy a bond, and in the bond, they're underwriting inflation, right? And inflation as the BLS publishes it. And so you actually get to hold that. But of course, if real inflation is 11.5% and the government inflation is 8.5%, there's still a discrepancy of 3%. There's huge arbitrage and perps and products to be built in that difference, right? And how do we find developers to help us build those? And what can we do to subsidize their development in that direction? We did a hackathon together with Chainlink. Love to participate with hackathons with your developer community in the Avalanche ecosystem. And we're talking to most of the DeFi players about these who are building maybe synthetic assets, maybe tokenizing real world assets and building, taking those securities and tokenizing them to provide an additional layer of liquidity. Who knows? But we'd love to be working with these. At the moment, at Truflation, we're 12 people.
Wow, you guys got a lot done with 12 people.
Yeah, we did. We've been running, I'd say started really about 6 months ago, and we've got some really good partners. We've got C Squared came in as an investor, or purchased in tokens. And then we have Fundamental Labs, which have a big mining and a big network as well. Have been in Bitcoin since the beginning. And then Chainlink, right? Chainlink is also a key sponsor and a key partner, and they've been super helpful. And yeah, so that's sort of really helped us scale really quickly. And we've got some amazing talent that's joined the team from Nielsen, from PIMCO, from Bloomberg, from BitMEX, sort of real rocket scientists slash nerds and developers, as well as marketing and product managers that know how to aggregate data and structure that. So
yeah, I think to touch on what you were saying, again, I'll say the phrase, "The necessity is the mother of invention." It's a good phrase I like to repeat often. And in the same way that I was saying, I'm a big believer that we will solve the problem of the environment changing for no other reason that it's catastrophic if we don't. So we have to solve it. There's a necessity. I believe the same thing for our financial systems. I think it's very clear that everybody's sort of waking up with a hangover and saying, "Holy shit, the way we've been living is not sustainable." So we're zooming out and saying, yeah, there's a lot of things that we've been doing that have been great for the party, but I think the party is almost over. And so now we've kind of got to have a little bit of foresight into what we're going to do tomorrow when we wake up with this crazy hangover. And so we're solving the environment, and we're also going to solve the financial markets. And the necessity is the mom and pop who literally their purchasing power is just plummeting. And so every day when they go, now they've got to decide between, do they want this amount of fuel? Do they need clothes? Do they need books? There's just not enough to go around. And despite, wages going up, the standard of living is going down for people simply because inflation is out of the freaking roof. And when you look at these charts, I'm sure you guys have seen it. There's this chart that shows how many USD have been printed over all of the years of the United States history. And in 2020, it was like, boom, like astronomical. Insane chart, enough to where your jaw drops and you realize that is the definition of non-sustainable. We have people who would literally have their finger on the print button and they're just like print, 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 and there's no repercussions, but there are repercussions. They may not see the immediate repercussions, but from where you're sitting as a human citizen who depends on currency to buy you the stuff you need to survive, there are absolutely repercussions. And so again, necessity being the mother of invention, I'm confident that we are going to start. We already are seeing the change. We're already seeing the change. Now it's just acceleration and adoption and getting the right legal frameworks in place. Again, because we're going mainstream, now we're going to be having the impact of everybody in the world. And so there's definitely going to be legal regulations and frameworks what's come into place, which is another reason I really love Avalanche as a platform. We have this whole idea of regulatory compliance built into the network. So in the primitives that we offer, the ability to spin up your own subnet and to launch your own virtual machines, you can have a full spectrum of completely permissionless all the way to totally locked down and permissioned with KYC, everything built in and everything in between. So we don't force you into any one way of thinking. We give you the tools to articulate the solution you need to suit your particular, regulatory framework and world you live in. And so again, that was one of the things that really jazzed me about Avalanche early on, is that we have regulatory compliance built into our platform, which is a big, big, big part of the next story of the blockchain evolution.
That's super cool, right? And I think one of the things is, what are the tool sets that developers use when they build dApps and use and work with the subnet? I mean, what tools do they use?
So today, a lot of the stuff we've been seeing is built around the EVM. So of course, the Ethereum virtual machine won in a big way. We could live in a different world where the Bitcoin virtual machine won, but despite Bitcoin being the big player, I think it's clear to anybody who lives and breathes this stuff, the EVM won in a big way. And they won by making it open source and forkable. So some people hate the Binances of the world. Some people hate whatever your favorite fork is of the EVM. I don't live in that world. I live in the world where I want the blockchain to fulfill its destiny and uplift the human condition in my lifetime. That's the world I live in. So if it happens to be with the technology I'm building, hell yeah. If it happens to be with another person's technology, that's actually okay to me too, because the end story is that the blockchain fulfilled its destiny and radically changed the lives of people all around the world for the positive. So today, 85, 90% of the work we see is happening in the EVM. So we have developer tooling, of course. First off, our C chain, which is an instance of the EVM, we call it Core ETH, it has 100% backwards compatibility with existing Ethereum developer tooling. So if you use Remix or MetaMask or Hardhat or Truffle or
Hard hat, all of those stuff.
they
Okay,
all
great.
work
Yeah,
out of the
amazing.
box.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
yeah,
I'm sure your developer experienced. All you have to do is add a new network ID, deploy your contract to a new network, and it's just like deploying to a different
yeah.
Ethereum testnet. And so that's pretty cool. So that's one of the reasons we had Avalanche absolutely blow up, because, as I mentioned, we had the we had the fund to incentivize blue chip dApps, and there wasn't really any work involved for these teams. All they had to do was basically deploy to a different network and then support it.
Yeah.
So one of the
Yeah.
things we've done is we've enabled this idea of stateful precompiles. So today, if you're doing something with the EVM and Ethereum, there are some things like cryptographic signatures, for example, which are too cumbersome and too expensive to do in straight up Solidity. So we have this idea
Yeah.
of stateful precompiles where you can write these advanced features in a different language, for example, Golang or Rustlang, and then you can
Yeah.
compile them and they get a smart contract address, and then you can just call them from your smart contract, and it passes the call directly through to the whatever you implemented it in.
The native chain.
Today,
Yeah.
you can actually do more with the EVM and Solidity on Avalanche than you can on Ethereum. That's actually true. You can be more expressive and write more powerful smart contracts on Avalanche today because of this idea of stateful precompiles than you can even on Ethereum, which is incredibly exciting. And so on top of that, I myself maintain Avalanche JS, which, as I mentioned, is our TypeScript and JavaScript library.
Yeah.
Of course, Ethos JS and Web3 JS, all of the tools that you use for Ethereum work out of the box. But we also have our own library, which does cross-chain swaps and allows you to spin up your own subnet and launch virtual machines. I maintain that myself. And just in Berlin, I demoed, actually it's on my subnet.show, plug for my podcast, on my recent episode of our podcast, I demoed spinning up your own subnet, launching a virtual machine on it, and then adding 5 subnet validators in 3 minutes using Avalanche JS. And so that's another big thing. We're getting ready to launch our own wallet called Core. So, we very much have been living in the era.
Interesting.
We've been living in the era of MetaMask. MetaMask has been clear.
Yeah.
It's got us where we needed to go. But there's a lot of things like whenever you are using Avalanche with MetaMask, some people are always like, Avalanche doesn't feel as fast as they say it is when I'm using MetaMask. And it's because MetaMask actually takes like 7 or 8 seconds before a transaction can settle because it's built on the Ethereum network and it's built with Ethereum in mind. So we have an entirely new wallet. There's a mobile version, there's a desktop version, there's a browser version, and it's called Core, and it's specifically built for the Avalanche network. So it's going to take in mind our sub-second finality. It's going to take into account subnets and virtual machines. And so I think that's going to be a big player. And then we also have built our own custom virtual machines. We have what's called the Blob VM and the Spaces VM, which is like a hierarchical key value store. So basically, somebody could use it to implement like a new age IPFS. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just coming back to the wallet because I think the wallet, we talked about what's the right user experience, right? We talked about stablecoin being a great user experience. We talked about fast finality, but then I think this interface, right, is really key. And so when there've been a lot of wallets that have each chain, you got the MetaMask, got Kepler, you got Phantom, you got XDeFi, you got Terra Station, all these different wallets that have been building out and extended, right? You look at those, how sort of from a core perspective, ultimately it's going to be optimized for the Avalanche ecosystem. Will it work cross-chain with other coins as well? And how do you see that when can we sort of expect that? Because I think that's one thing that also minimizes the bridging for Avalanche.
Yeah, so it will be able to work with other ecosystems, depending on, in the same way that MetaMask ended up working for a bunch of different ecosystems, and we were even able to fork MetaMask. If anybody remembers back in the day, there was something called Badger Wallet, which was a wallet that we created at Bitcoin.com, and it was a fork of MetaMask. So we even got it to work with something non-EVM compatible. Core has been pushed back, I think, once, maybe twice. Simply because we're going through security audits and stuff like that. But it's very, very, it's like on the immediate roadmap. It should be in live already. So that gives you a sense that it's, basically.
Okay, awesome. That'll be really, check that out, guys. That's going to be really, I think, I think, that's sort of one angle, right? And I think, having a wallet that is ready, available in your hand, on the mobile phone, I just think is so important as well. You have to cover and support so many different platforms. Right? People want desktop, people want multi-sig, people want Chrome plugins, people want it on their mobile phones, right? So how do you build it for that environment, right? It's not a simple task. It's definitely, and then you've got all your tokens in there. You've got your NFTs in there, and you've got different tokens across from different chains. You've got NFTs from different chains, but also NFTs that are going to have different purposes, right? You don't
There's
just
going to
have
be
your
open paradigm.
GIF.
Yeah, there's going to be entirely new
Exactly.
you don't even know about stuff that's going to be happening next year.
Exactly.
And so,
yeah. How do you build for that? And what is that open wallet architecture that is needed for that, to embrace the extensions that can be done off the back of a core service, right?
Yeah, you definitely need people who are blockchain native. So that's one of the things we've been very fortunate with at Avalabs, starting with Goon, literally our CEO and co-founder. He created what's called Karma, which was the very first proof of work payment-like system built in 2003. So, 8 years, or I'm sorry, whatever it was, 5 years or so before Satoshi. Before Satoshi
wrote the white paper.
He was already solving something called Karma, which is a proof of work payment system. So starting our C-level all the way down, we have a lot of digitally native and blockchain native folks. And then you have to embrace this the startup ethos of moving fast and being willing to fail. And I think Zuckerberg said, move fast, break often, or something like that. And you have to be a little bit careful because we're dealing with value-bearing assets. So we live in a unique world where you can't nuke everybody's savings. So we're not saying move fast and don't worry about shit. But at the same time, we have to appreciate that now we're competing with the finest tech startups in the world. And so we're going to bring our super supreme A game from day one. And we have to think about ourselves like tech startups. And so that's certainly how we approach the problem at Avalabs. We are a tech startup. The cliche I've been using, and I know it's tired, but man, I've been saying this for years. For years, I have been saying that the next Google is going to emerge from the blockchain space. And what I mean by that is the blockchain has the potential to be as transformative as the web or the desktop or mobile or social. And so in the same way that Microsoft saw the desktop and was like, wow, we could build an empire on that. And Google saw the web and Facebook saw social. Somebody is going to come along and see the blockchain and appreciate it for what it is and take a stewardship type role and build the next huge startup. And I believe that Avalabs has the potential to be that team. We're humans and we could blow it. I know that nothing's a given, but the way we are approaching it as we are a fast growing startup and we're working in a field that is very new and emergent, similar to the web. And so there's this absolutely huge potential to have a radical impact, which is going to affect people's lives for generations, and to build this system, which is going to transform everything. And so just every single day, trying to remain inspired, trying to realize that it's a marathon of sprints, trying not to get burnt out, but to push myself right to the level, trying to find the best people in the world that are trustworthy and competent and hardworking and creative and easy to get along with. There's just so many dynamics at play. Not only are we dealing with this crazy technology innovation, we're dealing with social innovation and what it means to grow teams of people. And so, that's how we're approaching it. Is we are we view ourselves as potentially a huge startup, and we're trying to do everything we can in that vein to innovate.
And that's why, why do I call this show Super Excited, right? No matter what's going on in the rest of the world, I just feel we live in the most exciting time ever, right? I mean, there's so much innovation that's happening. We are now exchanging value at the click of a button, right? And we can put a value to that exchange as we deem appropriate on a peer-to-peer basis, right? And to me, that's brilliant. This is the new frontier, and that's why it's so exciting. It's like really the best time to be alive.
I agree.
And so, you may ask, all this depressing thing, we got inflation, stock market's down, crypto's down. Yeah, but look at all the building we can get done. Right. And we're not limited and we're not restricted by these boundaries that have been layered on after century and decade and years just on top of each other, so that you can't lift the little pinky without sort of getting permission to sort of elevate it and use a muscle. You have to go request to get the muscle and connect with the brain, so that the brain, and then you can lift the pinky, right? I don't know. That was a shitty analogy, but I just thought it was interesting.
You're right, though, about it being the
Um,
best time ever to be alive. I say that as well, and that
yeah,
makes me happy to hear you say
yeah,
that, because I agree. Out of all of human history, man, this is the moment. Out of all, you wouldn't even want to
this
be
is,
alive 10 or 15 years ago. Like, it isn't literally now. We have the
yeah,
potential to have
yeah,
such a huge impact. I said it earlier on this podcast, but I'll repeat it because it's a big statement. So Peter Diamandis, the creator of the X Prize and one of the
yeah,
guys who's super plugged into the Singularity University and all that whole crew, he says that in the next 10 years, we will experience more technological innovation than we did in the previous 100 years. So, just think about
yeah,
what's happened in the last 100 years. It's pretty radical. We're going to experience more
yeah,
of that in the next 10 years. And then from there, it's going to only accelerate more. So the
yeah.
opportunity for you to take an idea, spread it around the world, find like-minded people, raise capital, and change the world is like never before. I mean, just 2 years ago, there was no Avalanche. And think about what we've accomplished in just 2 years. And so I just want to encourage everybody who's out here who hears this podcast today, like, you may think you're late to the game. You may think you're too old. You may think you're too young. You may think you're too poor. You may think you're the wrong gender. All of that is wrong. There's never been a better time
Yep.
of human history to take an amazing idea and to change the world right now. So go do that.
Right now.
Mhm.
Exactly. So come and join the community, join Avalanche, be a part of what Avalanche is working on. Find all the developer toolkits that are available on Avalanche, and we'll link some of the links below where you can go and find out about it. Reach out to Gabriel. Gabriel, where can people reach and connect to you with? I mean, is it best on Twitter? Is it the Telegram?
Yeah.
How
Twitter
can
and
they reach out
Telegram.
to you?
I have the same handle on Twitter and Telegram. So it's
Yeah.
CGCARDONA. So CGCARDONA that's my username. So reach out to me on Twitter
Okay.
or Telegram. I'm developer evangelist at Avalanche Labs, and I have a whole team. It's literally our amazing job to help on-ramp people, and not just engineers, people of all different stripes into the Avalanche ecosystem. So feel free to ping me, and we can figure out how you best fit into the journey.
And remember, this is a time where we're going to go from 20 million users to 200 million users, and you can be a part of helping shape that.
Yep.
Right? There are not many people building in this space, and there's a lot of opportunity for everybody that's starting to build. So super excited again to have Gabriel here. Always amazing, super smart, super fun, and a lot of insights from Avalanche. And check it out. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys. Peace.